Good evening, welcome to Tomcat Zone. Tonight's the first video of many that I want to do here. It's going to be a turn-by-turn after-action report for a battle that me and my friend Scott just finished in 5th Fleet by Victory Games, formerly a counter-based tabletop war game, naval war game, now available, or now transferred to Vassal, allowing it to be played on the computer, which you see here. The scenario we're playing is scenario 12, which is the Indian Ocean War. And just a brief synopsis is the Soviets, after set in the 1990s, the Soviets, after their long struggles in Afghanistan, have secured bases all the way to Kabul. And they have secured a 20-year agreement with India to provide them with military hardware, as well as an alliance that if India were ever at need, Russia, Soviet Union would be at their beck and call. In the interim, the Ayatollah in Iran dies, and the Soviet Communist Party in Iran wishes to take over, turning the state from being a theocratic regime into a communist regime, basically. And so the Soviets, of course, assist with that. What they never expected was that the Western European powers, as well as United States, would object. And by so doing, they airlifted and sea-lifted NATO forces into Iran. At the same time, India and Pakistan have gone to war. And India has basically crushed the Pakistanis all the way to Karachi, leaving them that as the last port that they have available to allow for any supplies and support to come from their allies, NATO, and primarily the United States. So our conflict here is basically between the Soviet Union and India as allies, along with their smaller states of Ethiopia, Yemen, north and south, and against the Western allies, which are made up by, of course, the US, British, French, Italians, along with the Persian Gulf allies of Djibouti, Ethiopia, Oman, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the Qatar, Kuwait, and Pakistan. So, looking at our setup here, you will see red counters and red bordered counters, which of course are the Soviet forces and their allies. Green counters, green bordered counters, which are NATO and US allies. The setup we have here is based on the setup in the book. There are some free setups for submarines and for task forces on both sides, but the limitations are that only maximum of 1 or 2 submarines can occupy a sea zone, and that the task forces cannot be in either the Gulf of Aden or in the Persian Gulf. So there's some other interesting rules here, which I might get into in a little bit, as far as we start the after action review. But for the moment, let's just go through setup. I'm going to scroll the map here, and you're going to see as we start here at the Gulf of Aden, Saudi Arabia, Socotra, scrolling down to the West Indian Ocean, U.S. forces there, down to the Maldives, into the Chagos Archipelago, where Diego Garcia is located, East Indian Ocean, over to Sumatra and Indonesia, which actually turns out to be a U.S. ally in this campaign, although the Indonesians do have a white border around them, so they can sometimes be Soviet ally. Bay of Bengal, up into Sri Lanka, into India, Laccadives again, the North Arabian and South Arabian sea zones, up to the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf itself. There's some really cool rules about the Persian Gulf because of the dominance of U.S. forces there and U.S. allies there. It restricts the Soviets in their strategic game plan as far as launching or doing any kind of strategic searches, strategic intercepts, or any kind of strategic air support missions, such as tactical coordination, all that stuff, out of the Persian Gulf zone. Same is true with Gulf of Oman over here, as long as we have friendly NATO forces, and I'm talking about air units available. Those air units restrict the same type of missions, the strategic missions out of the Gulf of Oman by the Soviet allies there. As we progress through these turns, you're going to see some changes in the module itself as I upgrade the module. Some of these things on the side, some of the counters on the side will disappear because we no longer use them as I upgrade the module to our liking. There were some things that we found that would serve us better in the game as we progressed, and so I updated the module and rewrote some of the script to make it more user-friendly for our game. Anyway, this is our setup. This is how, like I said, we had to set up and how we placed our free units. I'm going to speak from the from the NATO side, as most of this combat, as the NATO's player, I know what my strategy and my tactics were. Scott had his own reasonings for why he did what he did and where he placed his units and how he attacked. So all I can comment on that is as being on the receiving end of any of his offensive actions and the reasonings for both my strategic and direct combat actions here. So just a little bit about our free setup. In the South Arabian Sea Zone, there are a number of task forces here that were available to me. I had one here, Task Force 3, Task Force 4. Task Force 4 being centered on the USS Nimitz class Lincoln, the USS Lincoln, which is a Nimitz class carrier. Over here in or Task Force 2 was the British Ark Royal. Over here in Ethiopia, we had a task force centered on the French Clemenceau. And finally, down south, there is task force. Where is she at? Those are all of my amphibious assault groups. Here it is, right here in the Maldives. Task Force 6, which was centered on the Enterprise, another U.S. carrier, and over into the East Indian Ocean, Task Force 5, centered on the Ranger carrier. At the beginning of the turn, at the beginning of the game, my primary mission is to move different classes of ships, slow convoys, fast convoys, empty tankers, full tankers, amphibious assault vessels, and maritime prepositioning vessels to different locations on the map. Primarily my tankers, either that were full or loaded, needed to get out to sea from the Gulf. The ones that were empty had to get to the Gulf so that they could be refilled and had to be protected. The amphibious assault vessels had to get to locations either in Pakistan or in the Gulf itself, or to Indonesia here, to Great Nicobar, this island just off of Kamran. The maritime prepositioning ships also had that choice of Pakistan at Karachi, or into the Gulf itself, Persian Gulf, or, like I said, over to Indonesia and Great Nicobar. It's a long way, between all the locations. The map is really large, so once ships move, they can move 3 counters essentially per turn, so it can take a while for slow ships to move. Also, I had to get some supply vessels to Diego de Garcia. Otherwise, I would lose that facility as an effective air base. They run out of supplies, and it's just basically shut down for the rest of the game if I don't get convoy vessels to it. So there's a lot to do at the beginning of the game. There's all your units are spread out, and so you're looking at all your assets, thinking, well, what's the first thing? What's the first direction to go? I'm not going to get heavy into how the fleet games work as far as their mechanics. If you're watching this video, you are probably already interested in fleet games, and so should have a working knowledge of how the games work. I'm going to bring this first video pretty much to a close, but finish on this. My setup was basically an idea that Task Force 3 centered on the New Jersey, which is an Iowa class battleship, and then of course Task Force 4 with the Lincoln, the strongest forces there in the Gulf of Oman. Key thing is I have to shut down Soviet bases quick. Cruise missile attacks are the primary way to do that, along with bombers. Of course, once we get into the first activation cycles of the game, combat air patrols go up, and bombers getting through combat air patrols, even with with fighters escorting them, can be hard and a lot of loss in your assets. So bottom line is, if we can get cruise missiles through, cruise missiles will hit the base, damage it, and will shut it down until the end of the day, which is when the repair cycle ends and the base becomes operational again. If I can hit it enough times, we can kill those bases altogether, along with the aircraft that sit on the tarmac. So that is the first strategic thought here. Is there's a lot of Soviet bombers up here. If you can see some of these things as I flash over them, you'll see backfire bombers, and you'll see Badger electronic warfare aircraft. He also had a tremendous amount of Badger bombers and MiG-31s, which is a hypothetical aircraft that's introduced in this game that had some good range and good combat ability. Of course, the Soviets have cruise missiles too. The little white missile atop the T-95 bomber here is a cruise missile symbol, and each unit that does have a cruise missile has a series of, or has its independent number of attacks that it can make of that type. So anyway, my point being is I've got a lot of vessels that have to get into the Gulf, and I have a lot of vessels that have to get to other areas around the India and Indonesia. Not so much over here into the Gulf of Aden. This is pretty much Soviet controlled, and all I really had to do over there is to make sure that I limited the number of submarines that he had over there. But you're going to see as it kind of comes out of everybody's control who has what where, and just we fought each other to a standstill for the most part. But anyway, my ultimate goal here is to, at the onset of the game, is to set up a massive strategic fighter sweep that if he did put up any strategic aircraft on search, my key thing here is to, if I can move my ships without him finding them, and you have to locate the task groups and the individual ships to be able to even attack them. So if he doesn't have a detection on these things, he can't attack them. So my first thing is to keep everybody unobserved and quickly moving to their objectives. I need to make sure that the high-value target vessels, which are my victory point vessels, which have to get to their locations, are protected. And so bottom line, to do that is I got to make sure he has no strategic reconnaissance aircraft up. And I need to do that by putting a massive wave of strategic interceptors up. So if he puts up his strategic reconnaissance, my interceptors will be up there to bounce him and hopefully blow him out of the sky. Now, if he puts his reconnaissance up with his own fighter sweep, then of course it's going to be a fighter battle over the skies of the Indian Ocean here, and that's okay too. Like I said, I wanted to make sure I had sufficient aircraft up that I would meet any challenge. If he put up the fighters, we would sweep him. If he didn't put up the fighters, I was definitely going to sweep his reconnaissance aircraft. The goal, and the setback then would have been perfect because it would have limited his amount of his eyes. We have added a couple house rules here. One of those house rules is satellites. We've allowed for satellite rolls at the beginning of each turn to and then we get a number of detections based on our roll and based on weather and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, to wrap up this first video here, this is going to be the setup step of our game, and the preceding videos will follow with the actual actions. I will be talking to you soon. Thank you.